You weren't born into a system, you were dropped into a simulation. A loop designed to exhaust your spirit while disguising itself as normal life. And yet, somehow, you've always felt the glitch. The itch behind the curtain. That silent pressure in the air that told you something was terribly off, even when the world swore everything was fine. Beneath the noise of everyday distractions, there's a hidden mechanism. Not mechanical, not human, but psychological and cosmic. Its architecture isn't brick and steel, it's belief systems, emotional triggers, and fabricated authority. You weren't just taught what to think, you were taught what not to question. And that's how the trap stays invisible. The architects of this illusion aren't monsters from fairy tales. They're energetic parasites hiding in the folds of perception, feeding on your confusion, your doubt, your obedience. Not because you're weak, but because you carry something they can't create, original light. You are the battery, not the machine. The code they can't rewrite, no matter how hard they try. You didn't stumble into this world by accident. You were launched into a war that doesn't make headlines. A battle not of swords or politics, but of memory. The goal has never been to destroy you. It's to make you forget who you are. Because remembering, truly remembering, blows the whole thing wide open. And yet, within that war, something remarkable happened. You started waking up without being told. You began questioning patterns you were supposed to accept. You noticed the actors, the recycled narratives, the synthetic emotions that didn't feel like yours. That moment, when you stopped pretending, was the beginning of your jailbreak. Freedom isn't a destination, it's a frequency. A vibration that shatters false constructs and dissolves the fake ceilings over your soul. Once you touch it, nothing artificial can hold you. Not laws. Not fears. Not the voices that once held authority over your mind. You don't just escape the trap, you expose it. This isn't about rebellion. It's about reclamation. You're not here to fight the system. You're here to outgrow it so completely that it can't even reach you anymore. The moment you recognize your divinity isn't borrowed, but embedded, everything built to cage you loses its power. And that is how the real story begins. Some beings don't just question reality, they rupture it. Not with anger, not with force, but with an eerie clarity that something sacred is being suppressed. A friction that rubs against the soul, not as a flaw, but as proof that the script handed down was never meant to fit who they really are. There comes a moment when existence feels staged, when the colors feel dimmer than they should, the days too mechanical to be alive. This inner static isn't a glitch, it's a signal. A quiet alarm from within that the world you see has been constructed to keep you asleep while convincing you you're awake. It's the first crack in a wall you didn't know was there. What follows isn't revelation, it's recalibration. A shift in gravity. Small things start to feel loud. A sentence overheard in passing. An image that won't leave your mind. A thought that returns night after night like a code trying to be remembered. These aren't accidents. They're spiritual coordinates, mapping a way out of the fog. As the veil thins, so does the tolerance for surface-level truth. What once felt foundational now feels hollow. Traditions, routines, even your own thoughts are put under a microscope. The layers don't peel, they dissolve. And behind them is something wild, quiet, and unfamiliar, yet deeply yours. This path doesn't reward comfort. It confronts the architecture of your beliefs and asks, who built these? It reveals a system engineered not to kill, but to tame. Not to harm, but to hypnotize. And once that design is visible, nothing in the world can ever look the same again. Crossing that line doesn't bring answers. It births a different kind of hunger, the kind that no longer seeks approval, safety, or explanation. A hunger for origin. For wholeness. For a life that wasn't programmed by external blueprints but forged in the furnace of conscious intent. And from that hunger, a new role emerges. No longer the actor bound to invisible scripts, but the unseen hand that rewrites them. Every moment becomes sacred strategy. Every breath, a rebellion against the static. This is how liberation begins, not by running from illusion, but by walking through it with eyes that now see the frame. There are some who carry a strange ache in their chest, not from pain, but from compression. An inner sense that the world has been trying to shrink something vast inside them. And when that compression finally breaks, what spills out is not noise or rebellion, but space. It doesn't come with a drum roll. It starts subtly. A pause between two thoughts. A moment where you look at your reflection and realize it never showed the full story. That moment splits something open, not because something new was added, but because something old was remembered. The illusion of limitation starts to tear at the seams. At first, the mind resists. It scrambles to explain away the surge of unfamiliar knowing. But the heart doesn't argue, it listens. And in that listening, truths emerge like seeds breaking through frozen soil. The rules, the definitions, the roles once accepted without question begin to feel like borrowed clothes that no longer fit. One question loops louder than the rest: what am I beyond what I've been told? And in chasing that answer, you begin shedding every layer that once defined you. Not in rebellion, but in revelation. What's left is raw, electric, and sovereign. A self untouched by conditioning. There are moments, unexpected and pure, when the veil thins. It could be in silence, or sound, or solitude. In those spaces, time seems to kneel, and a deeper intelligence rises. You start to notice how everything is woven together, how your breath syncs with waves, with stars, with pulses beyond logic. That's not magic. That's memory. And memory brings responsibility. Not the heavy kind. The holy kind. The awareness that you're no longer drifting, you're directing. That each step now echoes. That each choice leaves trails of light in realms you can't yet see. You're no longer reacting to life, you're co-authoring it. This is where the real expansion begins. Not outward, but inward. The journey no longer seeks escape, it craves depth. And in that depth, a new truth is etched into your being: you were never small. You were only sleeping in a costume that couldn't hold your size. There's a quiet revolution that begins not with rage, but with refusal. A refusal to keep bending, shrinking, or performing for a world that thrives on your forgetfulness. That shift is not loud, but it's irreversible. It marks the moment a person stops waiting for permission and starts reclaiming what was never truly lost, only hidden. Some inherit stories that were never theirs. Scripts embedded into thought patterns, loyalties coded into muscle memory, and roles enforced not by chains, but by expectations too subtle to question. Reclaiming personal authority means dissolving that invisible ink and daring to write new language onto your being, language that reflects your own truth, not someone else's agenda. Each time you walk away from noise designed to distract, something ancient within you reactivates. It's not about being defiant, it's about becoming aligned. Choosing clarity over chaos. Choosing presence over performance. That internal pivot may not look dramatic from the outside, but it alters the entire direction of your inner compass. The weight you've carried isn't just emotional, it's architectural. Built into routines. Woven into the pace of survival. But awareness cracks the foundation. Suddenly you notice how often you've been responding on autopilot, reacting instead of initiating, absorbing instead of discerning. And from that recognition, a new posture emerges. The entities that drained your vitality didn't storm in with force. They whispered agreements. promised belonging in exchange for obedience. Their weapons weren't physical, but mental: self-doubt, overthinking, fear disguised as logic. But the moment you stop feeding those contracts with your energy, they dissolve like fog under direct sunlight. Freedom isn't a single act, it's a series of deliberate disruptions. Saying no without explanation. Resting without guilt. Thinking without consensus. These small rebellions carve out sacred ground within you, space untouched by conditioning. From that ground, real strength begins to grow, strength that doesn't need to dominate, only to remain. And that strength, once cultivated, becomes contagious. Without preaching, without convincing, it shifts the atmosphere. Others feel it and begin to remember themselves too. That's the silent ripple effect of reclamation, not just healing yourself, but becoming a signal that sovereignty is possible. Some spirits refuse to be tuned to the static hum of a world that thrives on dissonance. Not out of ignorance, but out of inner knowing. There is a frequency they carry that doesn't match the scripted despair broadcasted across existence. And that mismatch becomes their silent form of protest. They begin to notice what others overlook. Not because they're naive, but because they're awake to the weight of vibration. Each heavy word, each bitter thought, each echo of hopelessness isn't just emotional, it's architectural. And the choice to reach higher becomes less about comfort and more about survival of essence. Elevating one's energy doesn't require grand rituals or perfect stillness. It begins in unseen places, choosing silence when chaos beckons, breathing deeper when the atmosphere feels like it's closing in. These aren't soft gestures. They are declarations that the inner realm will not be colonized by what feeds on fragmentation. Even in the thick fog of external collapse, they find windows of clarity. A laugh that breaks through the noise. A quiet moment that doesn't demand performance. A sudden surge of gratitude for simply being. These moments are not decorative, they're weapons of resilience. And they cut through the veil. While others are pulled toward the gravity of despair, these ones swim against it, not out of defiance, but remembrance. Their movements become ceremonial, their choices coded with intention. It's not about denial of darkness, it's about refusing to be molded by it. And choosing to hold a higher note when everything around you demands submission to the lower, something remarkable happens: the surrounding atmosphere begins to bend. One person attuned to truth can ripple through timelines, disrupting systems that once felt immovable. That is not poetic exaggeration. That is field physics of the soul. What they discover along the way is that the true rebellion is internal. That joy is not indulgence, it's rebellion. That peace is not passivity, it's a stance. That light is not decoration, it's strategy. And each time they embody these truths, the unseen trembles. Not because of noise, but because of resonance. Some souls are not here to repeat, they are here to rupture patterns that never belonged to them. Not out of rebellion, but remembrance. A strange instinct tells them that the loop they were born into wasn't designed for growth, but containment. That behind the curtain of destiny, there's an engine built to recycle the same lessons until the soul forgets it ever wanted to graduate. The illusion is brilliant. It disguises itself as justice, as healing, as karma. It paints return as a gift. But beneath the polish, something more mechanical lurks, a conveyor belt built to stretch the journey indefinitely. To sense that structure is to feel the first flicker of refusal, the moment when the soul stops signing contracts it never read. This turning point isn't loud. It's subtle and internal. A shift from drifting to directing. The world doesn't immediately change, but the lens does. Every habit, every interaction, every unexamined loyalty is now seen with sharper eyes. The old motivations no longer hold. What once felt like progress now feels like pacification. To break the loop is not to run from life, it's to walk deeper into it, but on your own terms. To feel everything, love everything, and still not be consumed by any of it. You begin to recognize when your choices are leading to expansion, or when they're just dressed-up repetition. The awareness grows teeth, and those teeth bite through illusion. This detachment isn't numbness. It's clarity. And it births a different kind of courage, the kind that no longer begs for validation from systems that never had your liberation in mind. You start building from the inside out. Your compass shifts from survival to transcendence. From completion to ascension. There will be friction. There will be days when forgetting seems easier. The path offers no guarantees of ease, only alignment. But with every step into authenticity, the grip of the cycle loosens. Not because something outside of you allowed it, but because you revoked permission from the inside. And then the real declaration is made, not in words, but in frequency. You are no longer available for looping lessons. You're not interested in earning your freedom, you are claiming it. You're not waiting for the exit door to appear, you're building it. And with every conscious act, you're showing the universe, this soul will not be domesticated. To question the limits of reality is to reject the illusion that what is seen defines what is real. What animates our existence cannot be contained within geography, gravity, or biology. The true self exists in a space unmeasured by clocks or continents, a fluid, limitless current running through all forms of time. When life compresses into routines and deadlines, when the mind starts mistaking repetition for stability, it becomes vital to remember the unseen expanse pulsing beyond perception. Even in silent rooms and fluorescent-lit offices, that vastness whispers. It reframes failure as calibration and uncertainty as invitation. Living beyond the edge of the visible doesn't mean abandoning the earth, it means living as if the surface was only the prologue. It's not about escape, but about knowing that within you pulses something that echoes across all galaxies, waiting for you to notice its rhythm. What triggers this awakening is not external. It is the internal shiver that arises during stillness, a signal from a deeper consciousness that remembers what your skin forgets. Sitting in silence, you don't just rest, you listen to what speaks beneath language. You remember your origin isn't flesh but frequency. With every inner shift, the fabric of your outer world begins to loosen. Patterns crack. Old fears lose their grip. Your presence stretches into places where your name has never been spoken but is already known. Life responds to the vibration of remembrance, not the volume of effort. This awareness, though deeply intimate, isn't meant to be hoarded. When one soul reclaims its eternal nature, it sends signals to others, unspoken transmissions that stir the sleeping and summon the seekers. Together, we form a living constellation of awakened points, each illuminating paths for the next. To explore the infinite isn't to search outward endlessly, but to fall inward with enough courage to dissolve false walls. In that fall, there is no bottom, only layers of truth unfolding like stars awakening from centuries of silence, revealing that you were never small and never alone. Some individuals reach a point where pretending no longer feels survivable. Not because of drama or failure, but because their own reflection has begun to blur. There's an unshakable urge to confront the silence behind the noise, to meet what has been long buried under performances and projections. That confrontation doesn't start with answers, it starts with questions that unravel everything. Why do certain desires feel foreign? Why does achievement sometimes taste hollow? The beliefs once worn like skin begin to feel borrowed. Familiar routines reveal themselves not as comfort, but as cages dressed in routine. Breaking from this illusion doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds in strange moments, through discomfort, through stillness, sometimes through collapse. But something deeper rises in the debris, a voice, subtle and unshaped, that has waited years to be heard. It isn't dramatic, it's ancient. And it knows the truth you've forgotten. Reclaiming that truth doesn't offer ease, but it offers something better, clarity. A kind of inner honesty that cannot coexist with pretense. The days of performing begin to rot away, and with that decay comes possibility. Relationships shift. Priorities rearrange themselves. The mind is no longer a puppet, it begins to sculpt reality. And in that sculpting, the veil thins. You realize you are not operating inside someone else's instructions, you are the origin point. You stop needing permission to be real. Instead of contorting to fit into corners, you expand, filling the space you were always meant to take up, unapologetically. This emergence isn't just personal, it sends waves. Others can feel when someone walks without the weight of false identity. You become evidence that evolution isn't fiction, that wholeness is a living possibility. Not through perfection, but through presence. Your transformation becomes its own kind of invitation. Awakening doesn't end in solitude. It calls others forth. The more one life deconstructs its conditioning, the more the larger system begins to fracture. Not in chaos, but in revelation. One person standing in full self-recognition is more revolutionary than an army still asleep. Some learn to wear silence like armor, not to escape the world, but to remain untouched by its noise. In an age where direction comes cloaked as care, where persuasion hides beneath familiarity, detaching from suggestion becomes an act of sacred clarity. There's a choreography performed around you daily, subtle, repetitive, almost invisible. Expectations disguised as encouragement. Approval given in exchange for alignment. Over time, these soft commands form invisible walls, reshaping how thought forms, how choice unfolds. Unraveling this takes more than resistance, it takes presence. Not all instruction is invasive, but when you begin to feel hollow in the presence of outside voices, something ancient stirs. That stir is not fear, it is your native instinct, signaling that your truth has been overdubbed with layers that do not belong. The first rebellion is not loud, it is stillness. The path forward isn't isolation, it is intentionality. It is standing in the flood of voices and choosing which current to enter. No longer absorbing by default, but filtering with intention. You begin to decide what deserves access to your awareness. This is how authority returns, not through dominance, but discernment. Clarity doesn't shout, it arrives slowly. You notice your habits changing. You stop gravitating toward distractions that once numbed your clarity. Conversations shift. The materials you absorb leave residue that nurtures instead of erodes. Even time feels different, less hurried, more whole. Listening inward is a skill unpracticed by many, but it returns quickly to those who remember. The inner compass doesn't offer commands, it offers alignment. And when you begin to live from that space, there's no longer confusion about direction. Even in the dark, your steps feel clean. What once influenced you becomes background noise to a frequency more ancient than language. And by living from that signal, you don't just protect your peace, you become a living example that sovereignty is not defiance, it is remembrance. And in remembering, others begin to recall themselves too. Some spirits were never built to follow a script written in someone else's ink. There comes a time when the pulse within grows louder than the drumbeat of false authority, and that time always arrives at the threshold of transformation. It is here, in the still trembling silence before a decision, that something ancient begins to rise. To walk away from imposed rhythm requires more than dissatisfaction, it demands remembrance. Not of facts or figures, but of essence. The memory of being more than conditioned roles. A knowing older than language, stored deep in the marrow. That knowing is starting to stir in many, all at once. This isn't rebellion for the sake of noise. It's alignment through clarity. The decision to step off the conveyor belt and walk the wild, uncertain ground of soul-led truth. Each step cracks the illusion. Every refusal to conform becomes a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. One person's awakening may seem small. But when witnessed, it becomes permission. When spoken, it becomes echo. When lived, it becomes map. And maps in the hands of the once lost are dangerous, because they lead to places power never intended you to find. What matters now is communion, not the kind built on sameness, but on sovereign resonance. When voices begin speaking from the center instead of the surface, they stop competing and start harmonizing. What emerges isn't unity through control, but through shared liberation. There is courage in vulnerability, and revolution in transparency. Share not the polished version of awakening, but the raw one, the moments of collapse, the confusion, the clarity that followed. In that authenticity, others recognize their own timeline. The spark catches faster when it jumps through honesty. This is not a lone escape, it is a mass remembering. And each person who returns to their original frequency becomes part of a growing signal. One that can't be silenced or redirected. A signal that doesn't demand attention but compels it, because it reminds every listener what it feels like to be whole again.